Welcome to Pivot Point. My name is Michael Neal, and I work at a school in Tennessee called Vanderbilt University. It's basically my job to learn with and from some of the most thoughtful, ambitious, and impactful individuals who have come through Vanderbilt's Leadership and Learning in Organizations doctoral program. Before earning a doctorate, these leaders partner with an organization, conduct a research project in that organization, and offer evidence-based recommendations that make a positive impact. We call this a capstone project. This is a show about how some of the most dynamic capstones were constructed and carried out, and the particular pivot points that made the project, but could have broken it.
Just being true to the process in terms of really allowing student voice to be the center of it all. I don't regret that. I think that that was the right decision because it led to so many other things.
In this episode, I talk with Dr. Lakita McKinney, who partnered on her capstone project with All-In Milwaukee, a comprehensive college completion and career placement program. In the interview, notice the way that Lakita made some significant decisions about what data was needed to best speak to the problem that All-In Milwaukee faced, and how she decided to prioritize the voices of students in the investigation. Let's get to the interview so Lakita can tell you more.
Hi, my name is Dr. Lakita Little-McKinney, and I currently serve as the Senior Director at Leading Elephants, which is a consulting firm whose mission is basically to transform the way leaders at social impact organizations work. We really look at helping leaders and supporting them with leading with a balance of clarity, compassion, and conviction.
How did you get into that work, Dr. McKinney?
So I started this role post-doctorate, and I came into this role, honestly, as a result of the work from my capstone. It just really allows me the opportunity to infuse the things that I'm passionate about, creating environments where people can thrive and be the best version of themselves. And Leading Elephants as an organization allows me to really convert my passion for developing leaders and my commitment to equitable and inclusive workspaces into supports for other leaders. And so it is just a convergence of what I feel like is my purpose in life, my passion in terms of the work that I get a chance to engage in, and really just to support other leaders on their journey to create environments where people can just really thrive no matter what their identity is.
Kind of give us the helicopter ride over your project. You might just want to start with the organization and its problem.
So my partner organization was All-In Milwaukee, and All-In Milwaukee is a comprehensive college completion and career placement program that supports first-generation Black and Brown students. And so they partner with several colleges in the state of Wisconsin. And at the time of the capstone, I think the organization was being more proactive versus reactive to problems. They were going into their third year of existence of having a cohort of program scholars. And as they were preparing to really scale impact, they wanted to understand the experiences that their program scholars were having at these partner colleges and universities. Ultimately, the organization was created to make sure that program scholars are able to successfully matriculate and graduate from college. And so understanding what those barriers were to completion was incredibly important. It's not enough to just provide access, to get students in the door, but how do you keep them once they have enrolled? How do you ensure that they have successful matriculation? So at the time of the capstone, they only had freshmen and sophomore. They were going into another cohort, so they would have freshman, sophomore, and junior. And so again, they were being very proactive to make sure that based upon the national data, it's no secret that although Black and Brown students are definitely gaining access to college at greater numbers, the matriculation and completion rate definitely lags behind white counterparts, particularly when students are attending school at predominantly white institutions. And so trying to understand what are those barriers to completion was the problem of practice, so to speak, that we were solving for.
You could have come at this in a number of different ways in terms of helping them understand, challenges around completion and matriculation and completion. And you decided to really center this on student experience, and not just student experience, but student voice in particular. And you focused on bringing that out. Can you talk a little bit about what was it that caused you to make that decision that you really wanted to focus on student voice, and why?
In order to even answer the questions from the research study, I needed to understand student experience. I wanted to create space for student voice to be centered. I wanted to amplify their voice. I wanted to create space for their voice to be heard in spaces where they felt like their voice was either silenced or ignored. And the best way to capture student experience was, like, I used a lot of like direct quotes from my interviews. And after my first interview, the young man, literally, I can still envision like our time together and the things that he said and the way he was very open about his experience. There was just something in me that said, you have to use this opportunity to be able to elevate and center student experiences in a way that might not just be the conventional way of approaching a capstone, but I almost felt that it was my responsibility and duty to really help All-In Milwaukee understand what their program scholars were experiencing so that they could be informed as they were continuing to develop this program, as they were continuing to prepare to scale impact of the program as well.
That it's funny when you say it's not like you had a sense that it was not the typical capstone, or not maybe what other people were thinking of when they said capstone. What was it? What do you mean by that? Like what do you think of as the typical capstone as compared to what you were starting to envision?
I mean, like, very honestly, even myself, I struggled with imposter syndrome in some ways, even as I was completing my program at Vanderbilt, because I felt like I needed to fit into a certain mold of what previous capstones, like, how were they organized? What did they feature?
Right.
What were the methodologies, and what were the conceptual frameworks that were used? And again, I think everything that I try to do professionally and personally is typically tied to purpose. And I had to, and of course I would say with a very strong encouragement from Dr. Eve Rifkin around, why do you feel the need to have to fit into a certain box or a certain style of doing things? And I think that the conversation that I had with her really liberated me to allow the research to take me where it was going to take me, and to be true to who I felt that I was as a scholar practitioner, right? And to provide an opportunity to center student experience in a way that I hadn't necessarily seen it done before,
Right.
but in a way that I knew would be impactful for the students, because they felt heard, they felt seen, they felt validated in their experience. Also to help All-In Milwaukee as an organization, but also sometimes they felt like when they talked to their because their students there, when they would try to extend their voice, they didn't feel like they were heard. They didn't feel like their feelings were validated, or there was this press for all these additional data points to prove what they were experiencing, they were in fact experiencing. And so I wanted to validate their experiences and center their voice in a way that I felt like was just authentic to who I am as a person and as a professional, and someone who is an advocate and champion for diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And centering student voice was really the only way I felt I could do that and do it justice.
How did you decide who you were going to, or did you just kind of take who would talk to you?
I did a survey with all of the program scholars in All-In Milwaukee.
Okay.
And so then from there, so it gave me a sense of like just the overall feeling around belonging. I reached out to those students, explained to them what I was doing, really made sure that they understood that this was really for them, like they were the end user. I know that I am pursuing this degree, but like you're the end user. I'm really doing this for you, and I really want to hear from you. I had students who identified as Latinx, Asian, like
they're like, somebody wants to listen to me.
Yes, and students were all over it, and also I was really surprised how open and honest they were during the interviews, and they tugged at my heart during times of the interviews. I found ways to like connect them to other professional colleagues of mine if there was something that came up that I felt like could be helpful for them. And so I really became attached to their stories and to their experiences. And again, I the only way to do that justice was to make sure that I brought their voice into the process. I brought their voice into the actual report. Their voice was represented in my presentation, and I felt that that was true to what I had promised to them.
And what kinds of things did you ask them? I know you don't have the interview protocol right there, but what were some of the kinds of questions that you asked them that really opened up this space for them to speak on the issues you were hoping they would?
I asked them around, so of course they came into the All-In Milwaukee program, like they understood what the organization was going to require of them. They understood that they needed to choose from like university partners, like they understood like those parameters. And I asked them if you could do it again, right? Or if you can like go to school for free and you didn't have like this list of schools, like what would you choose? Would you have chosen that school again? And so just to hear some of their stories around, and I think that was where like the one quote that just stayed with me was around like this education was free, but there was a cost. Like I paid a price for this free education. So free really was not free for me. And just to hear, and students were happy about it because they did not want to seem ungrateful because you get to graduate from college like seemingly debt free. But I think it was just like understanding how they had to negotiate their identity in certain spaces that put a damper on what should have been and what could be a very fulfilling college experience. Like that question just garnered a lot of reaction from students, just asking how did they feel like when they were in class amongst other students. And I was like, to hear them talk about they were happy that we were in a pandemic because they didn't have to come to class to face people. They only had to deal with these microaggressions over Zoom, which felt a little bit more palatable versus if they were in person. And just to hear some of their responses. And like I said, they were very open to the questions I did ask. Just to hear what I go through on a daily basis and how does that impact my ability to be able to thrive in this environment. I think that they were really relieved that someone even cared and would carry their voice in a way that may change the outcomes for them. And All-In Milwaukee does a phenomenal job with the program and with the program scholars. But I think it's that tension between like we are the program that helps support students through matriculation, but we don't have direct oversight necessarily over these university partners that we work with. But as I shared with them, like through this process, actually you do have agency because you're helping them. Like as you bring in students, you are helping them with their diversity numbers. Right. Hold them accountable for just more than just bringing students in the door. How can we hold you accountable? How are you going to care for students once we commit them to your universities? And I think that having that conversation has helped. And I guess we'll at some point talk about the recommendations and which ones they have used. But I think that was a turning point in some ways for them to look at it like, actually, you do have some agency as you're partnering with these universities to care for the students once you commit them to these partner colleges and universities.
And can have some expectations, some high expectations. Absolutely. Not just of the students, but also of the university.
Absolutely.
Right.
And make universities honor, because sometimes in higher ed, we don't honor data that's not numerical, right? But like honor the data from we have tons of quotes from students who are attending these universities.
Yep.
How do you bring their voice into the space? How do you validate their experiences? And how do we hold you accountable for expectations for their experiences while they're there?
Yes. Let's take a short break. When we come back, Lakita talks more about how she designed the survey and interview protocols to draw out student experiences. This is Pivot Point, and I'm Michael Neal. Let's get back to our interview with Lakita McKinney.
But I also interviewed the All-In Milwaukee staff as well, because I really wanted to know, I wanted to understand like how the organization thought about their program and their practices and policies, and how are they thinking about the intentional supports that were necessary for their program scholars, but also what were those accountability pieces, had they even thought about as it related to colleges and universities. So the data gathering was also very intentional. Like I said, I started out with a survey of all of the students, but then had an opportunity to interview students. Some lasted for an hour, some were like an hour and a half. And then I interviewed, at the time, all of the staff who were a part of All-In Milwaukee. And at that time, I think there were only like 4 staff members. But again, they continue to. I think that from the beginning, I wanted to be purposeful. From the beginning, I wanted this to be more than just a completed report, a check in the box as a part of the graduation requirement. And after the first interview, I think I resolved within myself that this is not so much about me, but it is about them, right? And so how do I, in some ways, let go of all the things that I thought this was supposed to be, to allow what their experience is, what I'm learning from them, to now become like my North Star in how I approach this work. What I'm seeking to like ultimately understand in this process, then the student experience has to be the lead voice. Their experience has to be the North Star in terms of determining what are those necessary steps for me as I continue to go through this process. And so I felt like there would have been no other way for me to be able to engage in this work without allowing their voice to be front and center. Without allowing their voice to inform, how do I make recommendations? What do I think about even the structure of the report itself? Where do I use quotes? Which quotes do I use? Like, I really wanted anyone who read my capstone to understand and hear from students. Like, and I won't call their names out, but I wanted them, like, I had certain students in mind, certain like sound bites from our interviews that were just impressed upon me, like permanently. I wanted other people, you know, whether you read it 3 years later or whatever the case may be, I wanted them to be able to literally like envision a student saying what I was trying to say.
Let me go back and ask you this. You did the survey. I'm curious, was there anything that emerged from the survey findings that was particular to the survey findings? Or did the survey findings and the interviews really dovetail in terms of what you were hearing?
They really dovetailed. The survey just allowed me to see, because as I was looking at the survey responses, I did disaggregate it between like those who were freshmen, those who were sophomores. So those experiences were a little different. We were also talking about where you were in terms of entering college during the pandemic. And so I think that I was able to see some trends within the survey data that I wanted to pressure test in the interview space, so that I did not make any assumptions around what responses meant. And so the survey allowed me to hear a collective voice from all of the students, because we had like a very high percentage of students who completed it. But the interviews allowed me to pressure test some of what was kind of emerging from those survey results, to really, again, just more deeply understand student experience, which of course varied if you were a Black male or a Black female or a Latinx male or Latinx female, if you identified as straight or you were so like all of those identity like aspects played a part in it, which I'm glad that I did take the time to have intentional interviews with students, and even like my interview questions. Like I had a protocol that I followed, but sometimes students would say things that I was like, "Oh my gosh, we need to kind of veer down this path," and I'm wondering if this is something that I didn't even consider, and I need to talk about this in future interviews. And so again, like really being open and true to the process in terms of allowing the student experiences to be my guide.
Yes. So I want you to talk a little bit more about your findings, and let's just go through them one by one. So the first finding that like what you heard from the students was it is a triumph. It is hard work, even though the bill is paid, the tuition is paid, or the whatever is paid. Can you talk a little more about that finding one in terms of what you found there?
And so students talk just a lot about what it requires of them to persist. They feel the pressure of their community. They feel that they are responsible for helping to kind of turn the tide within their family as it relates to like poverty and providing opportunities. So they felt a lot of responsibility. They were very proud of the fact that they were the first in their family to go away to college. So like it's this, it's the pride, it's the responsibility. That's the triumph. Like I'm doing the thing that people said that I could not do. But then it's like coupled with these challenges that I have to be able to negotiate in the space, whether that's like in the space of the school, whether it's in the space of trying to understand who I am within my program major, because like that's also a thing. Depending on what major you are, your experience might be a little bit different. So I'm negotiating like those aspects. And so it's like this constant balance of like triumph and challenge.
Yes.
And I'm constantly like negotiating within this space.
We might just say a typical PWI student, they're narrating a lot of work that typical students are not doing. That a lot of it doesn't have anything to do with like, quote, being a college student.
No.
Yeah.
We haven't even gotten to the academic. It's like negotiating, walking across campus and all eyes are on me, or I get, if I'm walking within the community near my campus, does the person clutch their purse or they cross the street? Like it's the microaggressions. I'm trying to speak up in class and my ideas are ignored, but someone repeats the same idea and it's validated. It's like negotiating all of those. We haven't even started to talk about the academic
succeeding in now like trigonometry or whatever, right?
Correct. Like, yes, calculate. What are we talking? We haven't even gotten there yet, because this is just for me to wake up and show up in a space.
Yes.
Like all that it takes for me to do those things before I can even get to the real purpose of why I'm here.
So talk to me a little bit about the this second finding that All-In Milwaukee. You talked about a little bit about this earlier, but just like there wasn't a strong sense of, I don't know what do you call it? Responsibility, accountability from the partners that they were really hearing these voices and taking them seriously.
I would both and right. It's what are does the partner feel like they have a responsibility? That's A, and then B, how do we hold them accountable to that level of responsibility? So finding 2 is really around how can, again, because All-In Milwaukee does not necessarily control or have a controlling stake in the university partners, but how can you create intentional opportunities for like relationship building among students, community building among students that will help them to feel like, can you help guide these students in creating these kind of counter spaces, so to speak, in order for them to feel connected at each of these partner universities, because you only deal with a small number of partner universities. You have multiple students who are part of the All-In Milwaukee program within these universities. How can you create like these mini ecosystems to help students to feel more connected, more attached, and more like they have a sense of belonging?
So this third finding that students report receiving a ton of support from their various communities that they're a part of, but also that there's some tension there. Can you talk a little more about that?
Yeah, and so again, we're talking about first generation college students. So there's this tension in between if I am a college student now, what does that mean for my home community and family, right? Do I have to completely like disassociate myself from home in order to be successful here? Is my culture and all the various aspects of my culture welcomed here? Do I feel like I have to assimilate, or can I just be who I am in all of the glory of the rich culture that I bring? Sometimes it's this negotiation between responsibilities at home, and I feel guilty because I'm away at school, or if I have more education than my parents, like what does that mean for me? And so again, but still have a lot of support from family because they are super excited that I'm here. They see the potential for what I'm doing, but they also have never walked this path before. So like, how do you support families in understanding I can't come home every weekend to every family gathering because perhaps my weekends are needed for studying. But if I am a family who's new to having a sibling or a child in college, I may not know that. And so I may put undue pressure on them to maintain the types of relationships perhaps that we had before, or maintain the responsibilities that I had before. And so sometimes students had those kinds of tensions that they also had to grapple with.
Yes. The fourth finding was around the focus of university partners?
All-In Milwaukee is definitely doing a service for these partner universities by being able to bring in diverse students into the population, being able to provide scholarship dollars to support these students. But it's more than just access. How are you holding university partners accountable for the experiences that students are having? Because the students are attending these universities every day. All-In Milwaukee has regular programming, but the onus is really on university partners. And how do you leverage who you are as an organization, meaning All-In Milwaukee, to say, if universities are not willing to be responsible and accountable to the experiences that our program scholars are having, what becomes the next step if you want to think about perhaps we don't send as many students to this particular university, or we sever this partnership altogether and we explore other partnership opportunities? And so being really intentional about that, but you can't make those kinds of decisions if you don't know what students are actually experiencing, and you don't have ways in which to capture data around that you could use in a step back conversation with university partner to change practice or provide additional support or whatever the case may be. But you have to have some data in which that you can work from to make those decisions. Okay, and that goes perfectly into the recommendation. So to talk a little bit about what you told All-In Milwaukee you felt like next steps were. I wanted them to think about just the enhancement of the scope and sequence of their program scholar workshops, because they have these workshops starting in the summer, and then they have them dispersed throughout the school year. And so thinking about how you can enhance those workshops by really thinking about the social, emotional, and cultural needs of program scholars. So that was the first recommendation. The second one was requiring some sort of like journey partner, another student who's at the same university, to have that sense of community, somebody I can call on. If I've had like a really rough day, I can't necessarily call the my program advisor from All-In Milwaukee, but I need someone to like either help me decompress from the day or help to unpack an experience I've had. But just having like that person, like your person on campus that you can go to. The third one was just around a parent engagement component. Again, we're talking about first generation college students. And as a parent, this is new for me as well, right? And so what could All-In Milwaukee potentially do to support parents on this journey to really inform them and be intentional about that? The other one was having program scholars to actively engage in some sort of social action or advocacy project so that they understand that they do have a voice, and how can we collectively bring our voices together to impact change on these college campuses, and really to also help to create like more meaningful like intergroup interactions with them as well, because they have their own, like they can start their own coalition building amongst program scholars, and really leave their mark on these universities. And then of course the final recommendation was centered around All-In Milwaukee, incorporating some sort of accountability reports with the step back meetings that they have typically with their college and university partner liaisons that are assigned, and really determine how are you going to hold them accountable for student experience outside of admittance and enrollment, because like those are the data points that we love to tout. How many are admitted and how many are enrolled? We don't talk as much about like matriculation rates or experience, but those things are important as well.
What when you think about the work that you did for them, and you think back on this project, are there pieces of this process where you look back and say, all right, I'm really glad I did that way?
I think there's two things that come to mind right off. And I think the first was just being true to the process in terms of really allowing student voice to be the center of it all. I don't regret that. I think that was the right decision because it led to so many other things. I think the other piece was when I first engaged with All-In Milwaukee, I had a sense of like, here's some things that we could explore together because we had a conversation about it. And I think kind of asking permission for them to allow me to be open to the process, and them allowing me to kind of go where the research was kind of like guiding us. And they gave me the space in which to do that and the autonomy in which to do that. And I think that was important that I like named that up front, so that when I did make changes in terms of like my approach, I wasn't met with resistance from them, because I was very upfront from the beginning. Like, I want this to be purposeful. I want this to be impactful. And I'm really focused on where student voice is going to take me. And because I had that autonomy to be able to do that, when I changed course, so to speak, I felt I was at liberty to do that. I just, of course, always kept in touch with All-In Milwaukee, and they were aware of things that were happening, how things were taking shape. And so I think those two things worked out really well. Not for me, it worked out well for the students because, of course, like they were the reason why. But I think that those gambles paid off, so to speak, for me.
And when you say change course, was it was a shift from, or maybe a narrowing? Am I getting this right? That it was like, this isn't just kind of a broad project based on student matriculation and completion. I'm really going to focus this on student experience.
It really I think when we first started off, like, oh, let's just look at like what are the barriers to matriculation, but it really was centering student experience. And that was, I guess, probably more a narrowing of the focus. That was intentional, but it also held me accountable because there were so many paths, of course, that I could have gone down, but really keeping, again, the student's experience just became the North Star for everything.
How about for you, Lakita? When you think about the value of this project for you as a professional, for you as a person, anything stand out for you in terms of ways you changed or grew through this process?
Absolutely. I think about when I embarked on this new role that I'm in at Leading Elephants, my own personal belonging was centered. And because of that, I thought about what are the things that needed to be true for me to be able to thrive in a professional environment, similarly to how I thought about my program scholars. What are the things that need to be true for them to be able to thrive? So it definitely changed the lens in which I looked at things personally and professionally. Also, it just made me feel responsible to create space for voices to be heard that were either traditionally marginalized, unheard, and or ignored. And so part of my work at Leading Elephants is to help organizations to think about how do you create space for people to really thrive and be the best version of themselves. And a lot of that is really informed by my own personal life experience, but the very intimate experience of going through this capstone work.
Dr. Lakita McKinney, thank you so much for being with us. It was a real pleasure.
It was such an honor to have an opportunity to talk about the work that I'm extremely passionate about.
Well, there's plenty to notice from Lakita's project with All-In Milwaukee and the key decisions she made along the way. One thing that stands out to me is the way that she moved through the process with a willingness to be flexible and found her way to student experience and student voice as the central phenomenon that needed investigation. This led to data that All-In Milwaukee did not have but needed to understand the work that they were doing and take next steps in negotiating relationships with their partner universities. A huge thank you to the guests who make this show something worth listening to. Thanks to Peter Shellman for editing, mixing, and tech support. This podcast was made possible in part by a grant from Peabody College Dean's Office, for which I'm certainly grateful. Thanks also to the Capstone partner organizations, the hardworking Capstone advisors, and Program Director Eve Rifkin, all of whom make these projects happen. And thank you for listening. Please take a moment to review, and share this podcast because that's the way other people are going to find it. All right, I'll see you next time, folks. I'm Michael Neal, and this is Pivot Point.